we find this wonderful description for us in the Gospel of Mark of Jesus, the servant, the one who came for us, but yet he is also Jesus, the King at the same time. And he is the servant king. And it's been really, honestly, it's been fun for me to follow along as we've gone verse by verse through this book and really understanding Jesus in this specific way that John Mark has illustrated for us. Now, if you remember, John Mark is the one who is writing this book. Most of the understanding is that definitely he was getting his stories from the Apostle Peter. So John Mark, of course, was not one of the original 12, but Peter was giving him these stories. And Mark, of course, had some freedom within the Holy Spirit's work in his life to pick and choose and put together this picture for us of who Jesus is. Remember, this book was written to primarily a Roman audience. And so we find some really interesting aspects within that, meaning he doesn't refer to the Old Testament very much. He doesn't refer to prophets that would have appealed to a Jewish audience, but he specifically uses very quick stories, a lot of action words, a lot of action verbs that illustrate the power and the action that Jesus was portraying as he was serving people. And so he was creating that for the Roman audience, this idea that it is possible to be a king and be a servant at the same time. Because their mindset, of course, was like, if you're a king, then you came to conquer and you came to destroy and you came to reveal power. And yet he's revealing Jesus in this unique way. And John Mark is doing a fantastic job of that through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And he's building this picture for us of Jesus, the servant. And so that's where we get the title for our series from, of course. But he is the servant, yet sovereign ruler of all of the spiritual and physical elements in this world. Well, today we're going to join with Jesus following a very, very busy day for him. He's on the shores of Galilee. He's with his disciples. And he is just completing what we would consider to be a strenuous day. Have you ever had those kind of days in your life where you get home and you're just like, that was exhausting? You ever have those kind of days? I have those all the time. Thank you, Simon. Simon's the only one. Man, the 14-year-old has those. Oh, you're 15 now, right? Okay, my bad. He's 15. All right, some of you are like, I wish I was 15. I didn't have a strenuous day in my year. Well, Simon is honest, so Simon and I, we're on the same page. We have some tough days sometimes, and you get home and you're just like, I'm exhausted. I never want to have a day like that again. Well, Jesus was in one of those days. In fact, it was such a day that it revealed a lot of his humanity, showing to us that while he was God, yes, he was also in the flesh. And so he experienced exhaustion and fatigue and even mental fatigue because of the difficulties. I'll just remind you a little bit of where we've been. First of all, his day began with some accusations by the Pharisees that he was controlled by Beelzebub, Satan himself. And he was accused of that by these religious people, and they're like, you're controlled by Satan himself. Now, that's a pretty strong accusation. I've been called some names before, but I've never been called that. Then following that, after he's accused by these Pharisees, who we would consider to be his enemies, his family comes along. And his family comes and they tried to essentially kidnap him, take him by force, because his family thought he was out of his mind. So that's a rough morning to get started, right? Your enemies attack you, you're of the devil, and your family says you're crazy. So this is all happening in the life of Jesus. And then following that, after he deals with those situations, he goes out and he's teaching, and there's so many people that surround him that he has to go and get into a boat, and the boat has to come off the shore a little bit so that the people can't get to him and crush him because of so many people. And he spent the rest of that day on the boat teaching to them in parables. And Levi did such a great job illustrating those for us throughout the early part of chapter 4 and illustrating these parables to us and teaching and preaching. And that's an exhausting thing in itself. And so Jesus is doing all of these things, and he reaches a point, though, where he's exhausted. And the reason we know that is where we're going to pick up the passage this morning, because Jesus takes the important step of removing himself from the crowds and removing himself from the demands on his time and his body in order to get the rest that he needed to continue ministry at full strength. So that's where we're going to pick it up this morning in verse number 35. It says, in the same day, so everything's within this same time, when evening was come, he said unto them, let us pass over unto the other side. So Jesus is weary. He's looking for some time of rest. So he says to his disciples, hey guys, let's pass on over to the other side. Now, to them, that would have been a common phrase. It'd be like today if we were like, hey, let's go to North Van, or let's go to the west side. You would know what I was talking about. For them, when he says let's go to the other side, he's dealing specifically, you're talking about the Sea of Galilee. This is kind of an illustration for us. You can see up in the top north side of Capernaum, that's more than likely where Jesus was at this time. It was his home base. And so he says, I want to go over across to the other side. And chapter 5, that we'll get into next week, tells us that it was to a region known of where the Gadarenes lived. It was called, I can't even see it up there, Gergesus. You guys probably can't see it then. It's there. Just trust me, it's there. And he's going over to this other side. Now, one thing you can detect in the original languages is that there's a little bit of an urgency when Jesus speaks. It's almost like Jesus was like, all right, enough, I'm done, let's go. Like, I need to get over there, and so let's go over to the other side. And while I can't be sure, I am semi-confident that his disciples were also ready to go as well. And so they get to work in verse 36. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship. And there were also with him other little ships. So the disciples begin to send away the crowds. And of course, I imagine in my mind, Peter walking out and just being like, show's over, folks, go home. Everyone go home. So they send everyone away. The multitudes go away. And it says here that they take Jesus, and notice how the wording is, even as he was in the ship, which simply means Jesus wasn't going anywhere. He found his spot, and we'll see in a few moments, he was probably already laying down asleep in that moment. But they're like, well, he's already in this boat. I guess, whose boat is this? Let's take this boat. And so they take off, and they begin to head out over this northern part of the Sea of Galilee. Again, let's remember who's with him. He's with some lifelong fishermen, isn't he? And to these guys, this 8 to 10 kilometer journey across the north side of the Sea of Galilee would not have been a big deal. It would have been something that they would have been very accustomed to. It would have been no biggie at all. Let's go ahead. Let's make this journey. However, what you'll notice is that they this time were not alone. He includes the detail that there were some other boats along with them, possibly some people that had been there throughout the day. Maybe as Jesus was teaching, some others had brought their boats alongside so they could get closer and maybe hear him. But either way, we have this, to me, in verse 36, this kind of beautiful scene. We have the sunset over the Sea of Galilee, and the sun's going down in the west. It's behind them, and they're headed east across the side there, and there's this lovely boat, and all of these little boats around, this little flotilla, and they're just on this wonderful trip. Jesus is asleep there in the bottom of the boat, and off they go, and it's going to be a beautiful day, isn't it? It's going to be a nice journey. It's just going to be this wonderful time together. Well, without warning, things change in verse 37. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship so that it was now full. Now, this is just a short verse that gives us just a little bit of detail here. But in Matthew's gospel, also in John's gospel, it says that the storm came quickly, almost without warning. It says that the winds increased and the waves began to beat on the boat so much that the water began to overlap and began to fill up the boat that they were in. Now, again, to the disciples that were with Jesus, we know Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, and others, they would have grown up on the sea. So to them, it might not have seemed like that big of a deal. And as well, they would have known that storms often came up very quickly in the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee, I don't know if you knew this or not, but it is around 628 feet. Obviously, that's variable, but around that, below sea level. And is surrounding the Sea of Galilee, and my wife and I were privileged to be there, over a year ago. But around it are these mountains, and so it's kind of like the perfect place for storms to build up very quickly. And I don't know all of the technical terms. Some of you meteorologists would probably know it better than I. But basically the way that it is, because it's low, the way the weather works is that very often high pressure ridges would build up right at the base of the mountains, and then cooler air would then come it would create this environment for the air to just come flying over those mountains and come swooping down over the sea. Of course, we call it the Sea of Galilee. It's a lake, basically, it is a lake. And so these storms would whip up very, very quickly. I don't know if you ever experienced that before. When my wife and I lived in Texas for a while, some of you didn't know that about me. I lived there for 3 years and got home as soon as I could, got to Vancouver. But in Texas, they have the craziest weather. And I remember one time I'm not joking, I was in the office, and as people do in those southern states, you are always checking the weather. I don't know, it's just a thing you do. Of course, Vancouver too, right? How much is it going to rain today? And I remember looking outside, we had this temperature thing that did a reading outside, and it said it was like 28 degrees outside, which is hot, right? As I'm walking out of the front door to my car, I felt this just blast of cold air like I never experienced before. By the time I got into my car and turned it on, my car said that it was 17 degrees. So in the moment of me walking, and it's from here to the back wall to my car, the temperature dropped that much. That's the craziest thing I've ever experienced. And they say that's what it's like on the Sea of Galilee when a storm comes. The temperature plummets and the wind comes up, and it's like out of nowhere, you're in the middle of this incredible storm. And so here we have Peter relating this story to John Mark. And I think one of the things we need to pay attention to is that he was a seasoned fisherman. He had experienced these things. But just the fact that he is bringing up all of these details, it tells us how serious of a storm that it was. Have you ever been around somebody who does something every single day, but then you did it with them one time and you were super uncomfortable? And to them, it's no big deal? Okay, just recently, I'll explain it this way. Just recently, I had a chance to go flying with a friend in a small plane. And this was just like a couple of months ago. And I got to tell you, this was something that I had told my wife I'll never do. I will never get in a small plane. I'm terrified of it. I never want to do this. And this friend was like, "You're going flying with me today." And I was just like, okay, Lord, increase my faith. And so we got in there, and I took a lot of shaky video. I wouldn't show any video. There's a lot of shaky video of me like, and then eventually we reached this point, and he's like, "It's all yours." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Grab." And I flew that plane for like 20 minutes. Oh yeah, barrel rolls. No, I'm joking. No, definitely not. It was very steady that day, and my arms were killing me. I was so scared. And the whole time we're taking off, and the takeoff and landing was in a grass field. So it wasn't like at an airport, where there's people around and fire extinguishers. Like it was a field, And I was really scared. Now I didn't let on, of course, just besides all the sweat pouring off my face, but I didn't let on that I was scared. But to him, it was no big deal at all whatsoever. And I'm like, "We're gonna die, we're gonna die, we're gonna die." And he's just like, like no problem. He's made thousands of flights in his lifetime. And I was terrified. So you say, why do you tell us the story? Here's why. To some people, things are no big deal, and then to others, it's a big deal. So here we have Peter, a fisherman who spent his life on the sea, and he's saying things like a great wind, huge waves. The boat was filling up with water. So what are we saying here? It was a big deal. This wasn't just some little squall. Peter himself, these fishermen were saying, there are some very specific details here that you need to pay attention to. And I have a feeling he was starting to get worried a little bit. Maybe their eyes were kind of connecting across the boat, as they were starting to take down the sail and get the oars out for some better control as they start to bail out the water. It says that it was filling up with water, so they would have been bailing like crazy and trying to get water out of the boat and doing all of these things. But what these men didn't know in that moment is that Jesus was about to use this terrible storm, this frightening situation, to teach them an important lesson about God. About trust in God, about the power of God, about faith in God when the unexpected comes our way. And what Jesus is about to teach us all is a universal principle with spiritual application. And the first thought is really, really key this morning, and that is storms are a reality of life. I think you understand the analogy that I'm going to go with this morning. But storms are a reality of life. These men, when they set sail a few hours earlier, they did not expect that in just a few moments they would find themselves in the middle of a life-threatening situation. What were they doing? They were simply following God's command, weren't they? Jesus said, "Hey, let's go to the other side." And they said, "Okay, we're going to obey." And they started obeying God. And then all of a sudden they find themselves in this difficult situation, a time filled with danger and anxiety and concern on every side. And I have to tell you this morning that from that point, and even before then, and until now today, that is a pattern in the lives of those who have committed themselves to following after Jesus. That along the way in this broken, fallen world that we live in, we find ourselves confronted with storms. We find ourselves confronted with unexpected difficulties, circumstances, trials, and they often come upon us quickly without any warning at all whatsoever. That email from your boss, that phone call from a family member, the voicemail from your doctor's office, and he needs to see you. that harsh, critical email or that harsh, critical social post that you weren't expecting, the angry outburst or the abandonment of a friend or a family member, the car that breaks down, the investment loss, and it's a big deal. These are not necessarily problems of our own making, but part of living in this world. Adding to that, we have an adversary, don't we? We have an adversary that is against the people of God and actively working to bring trouble to challenge our faith in God. What I want you to understand this morning is that in life, trouble is going to come. We read that in John chapter 16 this morning. There's going to be tribulation that's going to come. That is a fact. All throughout Scripture, we are reminded about that. And one of the dangers that comes to us as Christians is that sometimes we fall into the false gospel that some preachers preach. We kind of label everything the prosperity gospel. But there is a false gospel out there that preaches that if you are a follower of Jesus, there's just not going to be any problems at all whatsoever. You're going to have health and wealth, and everything's going to be happy, and everything's going to be good. I got to tell you, that's a false gospel. Then on the other side of that, there's a ditch on the other side, I would say, which is that, we intentionally then seek suffering. We intentionally sabotage our lives or intentionally bring about difficulty in the name of false humility. And both of those are wrong areas to go on the other side of truth. But the true reality in life is that there are storms, and we are rarely ready for them. And there's certainly been days in my life that if I had known the call I was going to get or the email I was going to receive, that I just wouldn't have got out of bed. I wouldn't have got out of bed that day if I knew what was coming. Because it was an unexpected trial, an unexpected storm. Just this week, we got back from vacation really late on Tuesday night, and Wednesday morning, my dad had a heart attack. And that's unexpected, I got to tell you, totally unexpected for us. And through that process of getting that phone call from my brother and then going to be with him and the transfers and all of the things, we've discovered his ticker is broken. And he needs major surgery, and it's going to happen probably Monday or Tuesday this week. He needs major surgery. And so would you pray for my dad? And during this time, but it was unexpected, totally out of the blue. My mom was out of town visiting her elderly mother to help care for her. And then now this happens here. And we're thankful for God's hand in his life to protect him, to get him to the point where he's going to get the treatment that he needs, but he's not out of it yet. Definitely not. But it was totally unexpected and totally a surprise. 2 weeks ago, he was at camp walking around doing small projects and working, and now he's in a hospital bed. But I'm not the only one. There are others in our church that are facing a difficult road right now of treatment. Others that are just getting news from their doctor they didn't expect. Others with job loss, family difficulties, miscarriage, unexpected financial trials. And that was just the last couple of weeks. One day, everything's fine. We're sailing along, the sunset at our back, everything looks good and peaceful. And the next, the waves are crashing over our head, and it looks like this might be the end. We feel like we are thrown into an instantaneous battle for our lives. And that's where these disciples find themselves that day. These followers of Christ who were just obeying God, and then all of a sudden, they're in this difficult situation. But I also want us to see in this passage that while storms of life are a reality, storms are not a surprise to Jesus. Storms are not a surprise to Jesus. In verse 38, it says that he was in the hinder, that's the rear, the back part, the stern of the ship. Notice, he was asleep on a pillow. Now again, if Peter's giving these details, it must have been Peter's pillow, right? That's what I think. To give that detail, he's on a pillow. Come on, that was mine. I was planning on using that later on, and Jesus just snagged it. And hey, it's okay, Peter. And it says that they woke him up, they wake him, and they say unto him, Master, carest thou not? Don't you care that we're going to perish? They come in here and they see Jesus. He's sleeping. There's water everywhere. I don't know if he's so sound asleep and his arms hanging in the water. I don't know what the situation was, but they come in here and they're like, come on, Jesus, wake up. Look around you. Don't you see what is happening right now? Like, it's over. Don't you care? We are about to die. Now, it's a fair statement, isn't it? It's definitely a fair statement, because how many times have you and I said the same thing to God? God, don't you see what is happening to me right now? Don't you see that this is not right? This is not fair. This should not be happening to me. And we cry out to God and we say to him, like, what are you doing? Do you not see this tragic, devastating news that I just got? God, where are you? Don't you care? Some of you right now might be in that moment in your life. You're facing a trial and a hardship and a loss, and right now you are feeling that God does not care about you, that he doesn't see. You might even be doing your best to follow God, like these men, but it seems like God doesn't care. See, when these storms come, just like these followers of Christ, we often mistakenly conclude that we are alone, don't we? How often do we conclude that nobody understands? Even God doesn't understand. What a statement. Think about it. What a statement to these men to say, don't you care? We are going to die. But I got to tell you this morning, there's nothing further than the truth. Nothing further from the truth. Because even in the darkest of times, we know that Jesus is there. I'm reminded of Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Some of us can relate to that. What happens here? I will fear no evil. Why? For thou art with me. One of my favorite scriptures in all the Bible is in Isaiah 43:2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. We have to remember that just because we are Christians, just because we have the presence of God in the boat or in our life, it doesn't mean that you won't have trials and difficulties. But the truth still remains that he is there. Don't you think that when Jesus gave the word to sail across the Sea of Galilee there, don't you think that he knew that the storm was going to come? He's omniscient, isn't he? He's all-knowing. I don't think like Jesus when they woke him up was like, oh, stupid weather app, it's never right. No, he knew. He knew what was coming, and he had an important lesson for them to learn. Because Jesus knew that there was going to be some panic, and he also knows what you're going through today. He knows what you're going through right now. He knows what you're going to go through someday as well. And he is with you. If he is your Savior and you're his child, he is with you. And he knows what you're going through, and he knows and will help you to get through it. So the question, though, still remains, why does God allow it then? Why does God allow us to go through storms? You might be asking that question. I know I ask that question all the time. God, why am I going through this? Well, the answer is found in the rest of the story. Let's pick it up in verse 39. And he, that's Jesus, arose and he rebuked the wind. He corrected the wind. And he said unto the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, why are you so fearful? How is it? As he asked them a question, how is it that you have no faith? This is an important aspect for us to know this morning, and that is storms reveal our faith. Storms reveal our faith. Notice here, Jesus, as he is awakened, he takes care of the problem. We'll come back to that in a moment. But he immediately turns and he rebukes, after rebuking the wind, he turns and he rebukes the men that are there in the boat. And he says to them, how is it that you have no faith? Now, again, Jesus was completely asleep in the boat, and that is just a reflection to us of his complete and total confidence in the will of the Father, okay? So that's a great thing to think about there. He had complete and total confidence in the will of the Father. But then he turns to them, and he says to them, essentially, he's like, listen, after all that we have been through, guys, after all the things that you have seen, after all of the healings that you have seen with your eyes, and the demons that have been cast out and people made whole, and you've heard the messages and you know that I am sent from the Father, after all of this, you still don't have any faith? And you and I, when we read this passage, you and I are like, get them, Jesus, right? Get them. What's up with these guys? Don't they know? Like, of course, what's wrong with them? They don't have any faith. But this is so key because it reveals to us the heart of the Father by allowing storms in the life of his followers, because it reveals our faith. Storms are a revealer of our faith. See, the greatest danger to those men that day was not in the wind and it was not in the waves. The greatest danger to those men was their lack of faith, that it revealed their lack of faith. You know, it's so incredible to me how trials expose whether or not our life is rooted in Christ. Have you ever noticed that? It exposes us for who we really are. It exposes and even pulls back the veil on what other people think of us. Because trials always reveal the truth. And that is a huge reason. Now I know, listen, some people struggle with the idea that God is up in heaven just like zapping everybody with trials. Okay, that's not how God works, understand. But we do live in a broken, fallen world with sinful people. And part of the decay of our world, the decay of our society, is that there is tragedy and death and loss and difficulty. And God, in his sovereignty, and God, in his care and love for us, does not pull us away from everything and protect us from every trial, though that's what a lot of people wish for. But he allows it, and he walks alongside of us to help reveal himself to us and to teach us about our own faith. And so while what has happened to you may not be fair, and what you are going through is not right, God knows about it. And he is there with you, and he's walking beside you, and he's trying to teach you something. Now that is the hardest lesson probably in the Christian life, isn't it? To stop asking and to change our mindset from asking God, why, to asking God, what? What is it that you have for me? What are you trying to teach me in all of this? And if you've lived some life, if you've walked through some difficulties in the Christian life, you know this to be true. You know this to be true. You know how devastating it is to live your life questioning God all the time. And God is revealing to us something here. He's saying to these men, where is your faith in all of this? I've been with you before, and I'm with you now. And he's trying to get us to remember that, because one of the best things you can do when you're going through a trial is to remember how God walked with you through the past trial. Isn't it so funny how our focus just goes on one thing, that one difficulty, that one thing we're struggling with, and we can't seem to get out of that? God is saying, hey, I'm here. I've been there for you. I've always been there for you. So where is that faith? You know, in all of the years of ministry that I've been in, and I've been privileged now, next year will be the completion of my 20th year of ministry. I don't look that old at all, right? Can you believe it? 20 years in ministry. You should have seen it when it started. I'll bring a picture out someday. Next year, 2025 is next year. It'll be 20 years. And it's been amazing to me through all of these years as I've walked with people through a lot of difficulty, is how storms and difficulties and trials, how it changes people. And often it doesn't change them for the better. I've seen how time and time again, a difficult season will cause a Christian who maybe I felt was endeavoring to walk with the Lord, was desiring to to pursue Christ. I've seen them make devastating decision after decision. In the middle of a time where they need to be with God and be around church family, they make decisions that take them away from it. They remove themselves from community, the very community that God gave to them to help them. And then in the difficulty and the struggle, they lash out in frustration and in anger towards God and towards other believers. And what happens is they only add to the storm. And I'm guilty of this as well. There's been seasons where it's like, I get so frustrated and angry at the circumstances that it just makes it worse. It compounds it. It just makes it so difficult. But the storm doesn't cause us to act in that way. It only revealed the shallowness of my faith. I want to help you with something this morning that was said to me many, many years ago, and it's helped me a lot. When you're in a storm and you're in a difficult season, don't make major life decisions. I want to encourage you with that. So many people, you get in a difficult season, you get in a struggle, a time where it's a storm and you're not sure what to do, and they make these major life-altering decisions. That's never the time to make decisions, okay? So if you're in a storm right now, now's not the time to change your life completely, okay? I promise you, because you need to get to the point where you're strong in your faith and the Holy Spirit is working in your life and speaking to you. But if you're angry and frustrated and struggling, now's not the time to make big decisions. Instead, turn to God. Hebrews chapter 4 says, let us come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and, what do we find? Grace to help in time of need. What a gift prayer is. Sometimes we just need to get back to praying. When you're in a storm, when you're in a difficult season, get back on your knees, get back to turning to Christ. It focuses your heart on Him, focuses you back on Him. You know, David was an incredible example of somebody who turned to God in the storms. In Psalms alone, whether it's Psalm 19, 21, 22, 23, 24, 27, 34, 53, I could go on and on and on. In all of those Psalms, those are times where he was in a dark season and he turned to Christ. I'll read you just a few verses from Psalm 27. I believe it's such an encouragement. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even my enemies and my foes, come upon me to eat up my flesh. I mean, that's some strong language. They stumbled and they fell. Though a host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. One thing have I desired of the Lord, that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in His temple. In David's life, what you see as you study the Psalms is that in seasons of difficulty, and if you connect it to 1 Samuel and Kings and all this, you can see the parallel where, when he's in a struggle, in a storm, he turns to Christ and he turns to God. His faith gets strengthened. Now, did David make a lot of mistakes? Yes. Did he make bad decisions in time of storm? Yes. But praise God for the good decisions that he made, and praise God for all of it that was given to us in His Word, so that we can be encouraged as well. And the whole answer is turn to God. When your faith is weak, when your faith is small, when you're struggling, turn to Christ, because the storms of life reveal your faith, reveal your heart. And so be very aware in those seasons. Be very aware of your faith. Be very aware of how you're responding in that time of trouble. Ask other people for advice. Make yourself accountable to other believers. Surround yourself with people that walk with God, that you can share your storm with, that you can share your trouble with, that you can trust them. You know, they're not going to just, tell it all over the place. And by the way, every Christian in the church should be a safe place to share storms and difficulties, not the place to bring it up as a prayer request later on, okay? Like a gossip does not have a place in the church. Someone should be able to come to you and share what they're going through, and you say, I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to guard this, and I'm going to be there for you, and have that trust factor. I'm so thankful for that. But we need to do that at the same time. Just because you have a mindset of faith and maybe you're growing, it doesn't mean that you're to be fake either. That's the other struggle, right? We struggle with being fake. Inside, we are destroyed, and outside, we're like, I love Jesus, a bunchy, right? And inside, you're bitter and you're angry at God. You know, there's a lot of people who come and sit every week that are angry and bitter at God. And that's no way to live life. That's no way to live life. Storms reveal our faith. Storms reveal our faith. In the book of James, he talks a lot about this, but in one section specifically, he says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse, that's various temptations. That's also trials. Knowing this, here's what you need to know, that the trying of your faith worketh, say that word with me, patience. Worst word in the Bible, right? Patience. But let patience have her perfect work. So your faith develops patience, that you may be perfect, that's mature and entire, wanting nothing. James is telling us here that the storms mature our faith. And it is that point that we're able to find comfort and even joy in that truth. That whatever happens in our life, whatever God allows in our life, is for our benefit. That's really hard to accept, isn't it? It's really hard to accept. It's really difficult when you're right in the middle of it to say, God, somehow you're going to work this out for my good. That's really hard. But I got to tell you, God has been tested and He's been proven to be right through hundreds of thousands and millions of Christians that have, over the years, gone through difficulty and trusted Christ. And He's proven that they can have joy, they can have peace, they can have contentment, even in the middle of great, great sorrow and difficulty. And in fact, living for Christ in trials and in storms is one of the best ways that we can glorify God. In 1 Peter, some of you remember back to that study we did through that book, such a powerful book. He said, "Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you." I love that verse. He's like, you're going to go through trials and you're like, whoa, I was not expecting that, No, he says, don't be surprised, but rejoice. Why? Because you are partakers then of Christ's suffering, that when his glory shall be revealed, you may be glad also with exceeding joy. Then down in verse 16, if any man suffer as a Christian, don't be ashamed, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God on his behalf. See, storms and how we respond reveal our faith. And that's a hard lesson in the Christian life. I am not minimizing at all what you're going through right now. It's a hard lesson, but it's a true lesson. It's true, and we need to hear it. And so if you're in a struggle right now and you're like, you've lost all faith, you've lost all hope, God has opened the door for you now for renewal and for change and for confession and getting back and right with the Lord. And that's a blessing. That's a blessing. That's the hard lesson. But I want to share with you just one final thought here real quickly, and we are almost done, I promise, is that storms are under God's control. Storms are under God's control. I love it. In verse 39, he arose, he rebuked the wind, he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. In 3 words here, Jesus says 3 words, and there was a great calm. In 3 words, Jesus revealed to us his nature, who he was, the ruler of the universe, omniscient, all-powerful God. Now, what does that teach us? That teaches us that nothing is outside of the control and power of God. Nothing. No difficulty, no circumstance, no trial, no great season of pain is outside the realm of God's power. And so what it teaches us is that you never stop praying. Never stop turning to Christ. Never stop trusting him. Never stop living by faith. Never stop trying to live by his word and be the example that he wants us to be. Just keep on pursuing Christ no matter what it is, because whatever it is that you're going through is not outside of his power. And so some of you are in situations and you're like, this is impossible. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what our family's going to do. Whatever the situation is, it is not outside of the power of God, and you can trust him today. But are you trusting him? Are you trusting him? It doesn't mean, by the way, it doesn't mean that he's going to just remove everything from your life, that he's going to remove every trial. One of my favorite song lyrics is from an old Southern gospel song, and it says this: "Sometimes he calms the storms, and other times he calms his child." And I love that. By the way, more than often than not, he's calmed me and not calmed the storm. But he does work, and it is not outside of the power of God. Look how his disciples responded in verse 41. "And they feared exceedingly, and they said one to another, 'What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" What a great question. Well, there's only one answer. Jesus is the only one. Jesus is the only man that had that kind of power. The Son of God, God himself in the flesh, is the only one. And even today, in whatever storm of life you're in right now, Jesus is still the answer. He is the one who will give you the strength you need to continue on. He is the one that will walk by your side. He will not let you be overcome. He will be with you, because if Jesus is in the boat, it's going to be okay. If Jesus is in your heart, it's going to be okay. Jesus is with you, and he's going to walk alongside of you. The challenge is for us, right? He's like, I'm here. The challenge is for us. Will we turn to him? Will we trust in him? Will we rely on him? Will we trust his direction, his power, the fact that he is working something out for our good in this entire situation? If Jesus is in the boat with you, then simply exercise your faith and lay down your fear. Because when your faith is active, something incredible happens. Fear vanishes. Just like that storm was gone as soon as he spoke. When you have activated your faith and your trust is in God, it's so amazing how everything else just subsides. What was a mountain is a molehill. Why? Because Jesus is greater. Jesus is greater than all of these things, and you can trust him today. And that's what he's calling us to do. You know, I didn't know all of the things that was going to happen in the last couple of weeks, even within our own church body. I didn't know what was going to happen in my own life. But here's what I do know. God knows that we needed this message, didn't he? How incredible is that? That in the midst of some of the trials and difficulties that we face within our church body, in my own life, God ordained Mark chapter 4, verse 35 through 41. Levi could have preached it. He wouldn't have done a great job, wouldn't he? But yet the Lord worked it out. And I believe it's because we needed it today. We needed it today. So let's take heed. Let's listen to the Lord. And let's apply it right now.